Well, welcome to Friday in Jeremiah, Friday in the Word. Going through a great week, I think, in Jeremiah. Love these chapters. Today we're in Jeremiah 24, which I've labeled Figs in the Future. Yesterday was a long chapter, or on Wednesday was a long chapter, and today we'll finish off the week with just 10 verses, pretty straightforward in Jeremiah. A vision of figs in verses 24, 1, chapter 24, 1 and 2. Note when you start the chapter that this is after the exile of 586 BC. So this is some of these chapters, as I said, Jeremiah is not in chronological order. So these particular chapters come after the exile of 586. You can see the background of the exile in 2 Kings 25 and in Jeremiah 52. And as I mentioned, I think on Tuesday, Jeremiah pretty regularly calls Jehoiachin by the name of Jeconiah, which is what he's using here. In verse 2, then, we see the vision itself, 2 baskets of figs. One basket Jeremiah looks into, and it's just these delicious figs that are just ripe for the eating. It's like they're begging to be eaten. And the other is a basket of figs that have now are gone bad and are useless. Starting in verse 4 then, in verse 3, the Lord asked Jeremiah, "What do you see?" And he wants Jeremiah to acknowledge what he's looking at. And then beginning in verse 4, we see the interpretation of the vision. So the good figs first, Jeremiah 24, verses 4 through 7. We see the good figs here. God regards these good figs as the exiles themselves. He shows them as the exiles who have not turned, that God has not turned from them. But rather he has good plans for them. He plans to restore them to the land and change their hearts. Isn't that interesting? Return to the land and change their hearts. Well, in the near term, we see the books of Ezra and Nehemiah kind of discuss this restoration of Israel, the coming back to the land, rebuilding the temple. But the book of Malachi at the end of the New Testament, or the Old Testament, shows that, in fact, although they're back in the land, their hearts are not yet changed. In fact, the ultimate fulfillment then of this, and the fulfillment of the Abrahamic and the land and the Davidic covenants, are still coming. Even the new covenant of Jeremiah 31 is awaiting the Messianic age. So we see here in this prophecy of the good figs, not only a near-term restoration of the people, but it's looking longer to their full and final restoration when God is finally going to change their hearts. The bad figs then are discussed in chapter 24, verses 8 through 10. And here God regards the king and the other leaders and those who stayed in Jerusalem and those who fled to Egypt. These are the worthless figs. These are the figs that need to be thrown out, that nobody wants. God doesn't want them. They will be, in fact, a living example of God's judgment, and they're going to end up being wiped out. And again, there's a near-term and a long-term fulfillment of this. In the near term, this judgment happened on those people during the aftermath of Jerusalem's destruction. And again, you can turn to 2 Kings 25, I think verse 18 and following, and the last part of Jeremiah chapter 52 to see the fate of those who stayed behind and resisted. Of course, in the long term, it's during the tribulation and the judgment of Jesus at the start of the millennial kingdom that the final purging of the unfaithful leadership of Israel will take place. So we see again in verses 8 through 10 a near-term and a long-term fulfillment. A partial fulfillment near-term, a fuller and richer and more complete fulfillment long-term. Why does God do this? We see this often with prophecies, see this a near term and a long term. I think this is a number of reasons. Number one, it means something to the people at the time. So this means something to the people living when Jeremiah is predicting the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile to Babylon. But it's also kind of a promise that what God has done in the past partially, He's more than able to do in the future fully. So it's for our benefit in what I think to be, we're living in the very end of the last days. What are we to learn from this? Well, a couple things. Again, there seems to be a couple of applications that we can make. Nothing, for example, first of all, nothing's going to prevent God from fulfilling His promise to Israel. Neither the evil among His people, the evil among His leadership, nor the evil of the people that come against Him are going to be able to resist God in fulfilling His promises, His covenants with His people, the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 12, the land covenant in Deuteronomy 30, the Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel 7, and the new covenant in Jeremiah 31. These are unilateral promises from God, and no evil among His people and no evil in the earth is going to prevent Him from fulfilling these promises, and that promise is coming. Finally, also in the church age, that we can rest assured that our salvation is just as sure. I love in John 10:27-29, the Lord assures us, He says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." There's kind of this internal witness of our fellowship with the Lord. It says, "I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand." So there's Jesus assuring us that we are in His grip. No one's taking us out of His hands. Then He goes on to say, as if something more was needed to say, He goes on. He says, "My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand." So Jesus has received them. God has given to them. Jesus has us. God has us. We're in this, what's called a double grip of grace here. And we're never going to be lost. We'll never be lost to the Lord. Our salvation is assured, as is Israel's future. So dwell on these thoughts this weekend, brothers and sisters. Thank God for the assurance of your salvation. Thank God that we are in His hands, the Father, the Son, and that we are enjoying the assurance of our salvation today. God bless you, brothers and sisters. Have a great weekend in the Lord, and we'll be back in Jeremiah next week.